What do I have in common with Van Halen? No, I'm not running with no devils. That's what we as a nation are doing, I think, with the president in the United States right now. Oh, my goodness gracious. Every time he opens his mouth or has a microphone placed in front of it, he's got something else outrageous and or inflammatory to say. But I'll get to that in just a bit. To the point about the song that starts the show today, that, of course, is Van Halen. And it was on this day 47 years ago in 1978 that Van Halen's debut album peaked at number 19 on the Billboard 200 album charts. The album was released on this day in 1978, and it was a self-titled debut album. That's what they have in common with me. It's a self-titled show. This is called The Mike Farwell Show. Van Halen's first album was called Van Halen, and Runnin' with the Devil was one of the songs from said album. There you have it, released on this day in 1978. This day is the 10th of February, 2025. Or to put it another way, this day is the 1 millionth day of the winter of 2025. Come on with your coming on. Oh my goodness, I was shoveling the driveway yesterday, which felt like it took an eternity, and a gentleman driving by slowed, put down his window, and said, "We are Canadians. We will not surrender." And he might have been talking about living in the shadow of Donald Trump and the threat of annexation and 25% tariffs. I don't know. But I took him to mean that we can handle this kind of snow. And I told him flat out, if I had a white flag right now, I would wave it. On the bright side, we got to look for the glass half full side of this, okay? And the glass half full side of this is that at least the snow came on the weekend. We could spend some time before our Super Bowl party digging ourselves out and getting ready to come back to work today. The main traffic not disrupted. The school buses were able to run today. Everything is just fine. But this winter can take a long walk off a short pier anytime it is ready. Speaking of that Super Bowl, what a super bore that turned out to be, didn't it? My goodness. I mean, unless you like defense. And as a Pittsburgh Steelers fan, that's usually what I like in football. So it must be something about those teams in Pennsylvania, huh? Because the Philadelphia Eagles ran roughshod over the Kansas City Chiefs, and so much for history being made at the Super Bowl yesterday with a team winning for the first time ever 3 consecutive Super Bowls. It wasn't even close. The final score, dare I say, flattered the Kansas City Chiefs. But that was the Super Bowl last night. Something even more important, if I may be so bold as to suggest, is this.
Playoffs? Don't talk about playoffs. You kidding me? Playoffs?
Playoffs? Yeah, we're talking about playoffs, Jim Mora, because the Kitchener Rangers, with a win on Saturday in St. Catharines over the Niagara Ice Dogs, and the Kitchener Rangers won that game by scoring 9, count them, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 goals, more than they had scored on any other game this season. And with the win, the Kitchener Rangers clinch a playoff spot. Look at that. February the 8th was the day. 16 games to go in the regular season, and the Kitchener Rangers are assured of a playoff spot. Now the head coach says, well, we got to get to 100 points. Guy's never satisfied, that UC Ahokas. He's never satisfied. But congratulations to our Kitchener Rangers. We knew they were going. This was just a formality, but clinching on February the 8th, pretty special stuff.
One is the loneliest number that you'll ever.
All right, let's get to your Farwell Show 5 for this Monday morning. Number 1, U.S. President Donald Trump expected to formally announce 25% tariffs on all steel and aluminum imports today.
We subsidize them to the tune of about $200 billion a year. If we stop doing that, if we stop allowing them to make cars through tariffs and other things, cars, trucks, etc., what they make, they're not viable as a country.
A 25% tariff on all Canadian products due to Trump's concerns about the border remains on pause until the end of the month. We're talking tariffs both politically and through the lens of local businesses on the show between 9:30 and 10:30 this morning. Number 2, Canada's aid sector is asking our federal government for support as Washington winds down its Agency for International Development. The decision to cancel U.S. aid has left some Canadian projects in limbo. A Canadian aid coalition says millions of people are being cut off from life-saving supplies. Number 3 on your Farwell Show 5 this morning, Ontario Green Party leader Mike Schreiner in Cambridge today, where he'll tour a women's shelter that's being built. Meantime, NDP leader Marit Stiles and Liberal leader Bonnie Crombie making separate healthcare announcements this morning in Toronto, while PC leader Doug Ford is in Oakville today. The provincial election is just over 2 weeks away on February the 27th. Number 4, we are bracing for some more wicked weather this week with a storm anticipated Wednesday night into Thursday morning that could bring as much as 15 centimeters to our region and 570s. Meteorologist Jill Taylor says, yeah, that's not all.
And then another round for late Friday into Saturday. So that's something to watch as well.
Thanks for that, Jill. Thanks very much for that. Number 5 on your Farwell Show 5 this morning, actor Samuel L. Jackson introduced Kendrick Lamar at the Super Bowl halftime performance. Just a week after Lamar won 5 Grammy Awards, his performance included his diss track of Toronto rapper Drake. How far the Super Bowl has come. What was it, about 20 years ago that we all lost our collective minds over a breast being displayed because of a quote-unquote wardrobe malfunction? And 20 years later, you get a rapper headlining the Super Bowl halftime show, and he alludes to a fellow rapper being a pedophile, and the beat just goes on, doesn't it? Times have changed. And that is your Farwell Show 5 for this Monday morning. We'll take a break. When we come back, brace yourself. We're going to spin the wheel of Pauls here on the show. I got a couple people named Paul waiting on the phone lines for a Monday morning wake-up call. We'll answer it coming up. This is the Mike Farwell Show, 570 News Radio and Rogers TV. The minute we begin the show every day, our phone lines are open to you at 519-570-2545, star 570, and 1-800-570-5715. I don't know how I got this lucky, but not one but 2 Pauls wait on our phone lines to start this show today. Paul number 1. Good morning.
Good morning, Mike. Paul from Kitchener.
Paul from Kitchener, good morning.
Listen, you mentioned earlier about the shoveling your driveway.
Yes, sir.
You know what I'm grateful for is our neighborhood where we live, the snowblowers came out Sunday morning, and everybody's driveway after the plow went through and the deep snow, it was all done. Like the whole street was done. Everybody helped each other.
It's pretty great.
You know what? We don't hear enough about the good stuff happening in our region, in our neighborhoods, in our city. Today I wanted to share it was a good thing because I went out to do mine and, the neighbor's done. Oh, that neighbor's done. The sidewalks are done. Everything done by the neighborhood.
I love to hear it, Paul. Thanks for sharing that. Really appreciate it. Enjoy your day, sir. And you know what? It was exactly the same in our neighborhood. We had a drive, let's say. It took a lot longer than it needed to getting home from St. Catharines on Saturday because of the snow, but it's fine. We had a guy named Moose driving the bus. That guy's a champ. He's passing people out there. He cares not. He was safe. Don't get me wrong, but he was a boss. But rolled in about 1 on Sunday morning after that trip down to St. Catharines for the Rangers game. And I knew as I trudged home in the snow that our neighborhood was going to be out with the snowblowers too. And I don't want to be that lazy guy. So I made sure that before 9, I was up and at 'em on Sunday morning because sure enough, right around 9:10, the snowblowers came out in our neighborhood too. 3 different guys with 3 different snowblowers. And just like Paul described, up and down the street. And as I was out there, because again, I know they've got the snowblower, but I want to do my part. I'll clean up some edges. I'll get to the areas they can't get. I don't want to look lazy. And then the one guy, though, came right up my whole driveway, too. So there you go. And to pay it forward, I got a buddy who's out of town. We got to make sure that snow's taken care of. I took my shovel over there. Felt like a kid again, carrying a shovel through the neighborhood so I could go and clean up his place too. That's what we do together as neighbors, right? All right, from one Paul to another. Good morning, Paul number 2.
You got to get that shovel going to wear off some of those butter tarts.
You're telling me. Yeah.
There's a couple of things we need to do here. First off, we need to get the Canadian government back to work. They've been on vacation long enough.
It's not vacation. Settle down.
We need to get them back to work, get things straightened out, hold an election, and elect a government that's going to represent Canada. The next step after that, what we're going to do is we're going to annex the United States of America. You talk about amalgamation, how you're so much in favor of it. Down in the States, they have states that are so small, you could fit a dozen of them in the center median of the 401. We're going to amalgamate all those states and make them into individual provinces. I think Alaska is big enough that we'll accept it as a province, but all these other rinky-dink little states, we're just going to amalgamate them and turn them into individual provinces. With the proper Canadian government that stands for Canadians, we can make it work. The heck with Trump. We'll put him on the unemployment line when we annex the United States.
How many provinces and territories do you see in your master plan here, Paul? We've got 10 and 3 right now.
They got, 50 states?
Yeah.
You talk about things like Rhode Island. That's just a little strip of land. So
what's your vision? I want to my vision. You want to talk about amalgamation? You know my vision for that, right? One local government to rule us all.
The U.S. is so small. We're going to keep Alaska.
We're going to keep
as a separate province.
Okay, so that's 11 provinces now. 11 provinces and 3 territories now. And then what? The other 49 states.
Those other 49. I think we're going to give up on Hawaii. It's so far out there. We don't
I'm not giving up on Hawaii.
We're going to have, let's see.
I'm getting annoyed now, Paul.
I'm going to say about maybe 6 or 7 provinces. We'll turn it into 6 or 7 provinces.
All right, I'm done. Now, you don't get rid of my Hawaii, my bucket list vacation, where, by the way, we had listeners from during our Rangers game on Friday night. I love Rangers Nation. You travel so well. Checking in from Honolulu during the game on Friday night. Anyway, I was giving Paul a bit of a hard time, but, show your work. If you think this amalgamation and let's annex the U.S. is a good idea, I want to know what the plan looks like. So 6 or 7, I'll give them 7, plus Alaska is 8, so we'll become 18 provinces and 3 territories. And then it's the great state of Canada. I'm here for it, baby. Let's go. Take that, Donald Trump. This is the Mike Farwell Show, 570 News Radio and Rogers TV. Email this morning from Andrea to Mike at 570news.com. Mike, can you please remind people to be kind and try, if they can, to clear a path through the snowbanks for the mail carriers? It doesn't take much to be nice. Thanks for the reminder, Andrea. I think that would mean on those corners when the plow comes by, leaves the big stuff. That goes for anybody, I think. I don't imagine that you leave a path through the snowbanks for the mail carriers on your front lawn or anything. But yes, for anybody that lives on a corner, I know it's more work and I know it sucks. Believe you me, this has not been an easy winter. I am sure that sometime not too long from now, we will be reminded and or told that this was your quote unquote average Canadian winter when it comes to temperatures, snowfall, etc. But it seems to me that the last many winters have been so mild compared to this and with so much less snow that this one feels particularly onerous. And again, I'll remind you, our meteorologist, Jill Taylor, says there's more coming. Wednesday night into Thursday morning is going to be pretty messy with 15 to 20 centimeters currently in the forecast. And Jill says even more Friday into Saturday. So make sure you get out there and get those walkways clear so people have safe and easy passage around our community. And I can't help but think, as I said, Andrea's email, clearing a path through the snowbanks, must mean along those curbs, on corners, etc. Because I ain't going to shovel something out of my front lawn. And I always find it funny. I'm pretty meticulous. I do my very best to keep the snow cleared right down to the pavement. And I do, for the most part. And inevitably, the mail carrier comes trudging across the grass anyway. Knee-deep snow, he's just pounding through it. I don't know. I cleared a path for you, my friend. I cleared a path for you. Something else to maybe keep in mind when we talk about clearing things away. And my neighbor, one of the guys with a snowblower who was out yesterday, did this again, as he always does. Clear the fire hydrant as well. If you've got a fire hydrant at your place, it's a good idea to keep that clear just in case, don't you know, we have an emergency or some such thing. So another good reminder to be a good winter neighbor. All right, we're fast approaching your 9:30 update in the 570 News Center. And Donald Trump, on his way to the Super Bowl last night, aboard Air Force One, put a camera and a microphone in front of the guy, and he's going to start talking. And here come the 25% tariffs on steel and aluminum. The rest of those tariffs, if you will, on all Canadian goods are still paused. But steel, aluminum, 25%. A formal announcement is expected later today. How are we dealing with this politically and from a business perspective? Let's have the conversation coming up. This is the Mike Farwell Show on 570 News Radio and Rogers TV. We are Canadians. We will never surrender. I remind you of the words spoken to me as I shoveled the driveway yesterday. I wasn't really sure if the gentleman who stopped, I didn't recognize him from the neighborhood. I should probably know my neighbors better. Anyway, I don't know if he stopped to say that because of all the snow. We won't surrender in the face of that or under the weight of it, or if he meant in the face of tariffs and the threat of annexation by Donald Trump and the United States. But Canada's big city mayors got together last week and talked about a Team Canada approach to tariffs and trade. One of those big city mayors is the mayor of Kitchener, Barry Verbanovic, who joins us for a conversation. Mayor Verbanovic, good morning.
Good morning, Mike. Happy Monday.
Happy Monday to you as well. It's the beginning of a busy day, council meetings, etc. for you. So thanks for making the time.
Always glad to join you. Thank you so much.
What was the sentiment at those meetings last week with the Big City Mayor's Caucus, Mayor Verbanovic?
You know, Mike, I would say the sentiment was exactly what the neighbor that drove by and stopped to share those sentiments with you is exactly what you heard around the table from Canada's 23 big city mayors, and what we heard, quite frankly, from the Prime Minister, Minister Joly, as well as Housing and Infrastructure Minister Nathaniel Erskine-Smith. You know, I think everyone it's fair to say, puzzled, perplexed about the approach that our neighbors to the south of us are taking. It is not something that we've experienced, quite frankly, in the historical relationship that's existed between our two countries. And I think the ad that played during the Super Bowl, the Ontario ad, that reminds people of how we've stood by each other over the years, whether it was in conflict in the world wars, whether it was during times like 9/11 when Gander became the landing spot, to so many other things on a day-to-day basis. And unfortunately, it just means that we need to take a bit of a different approach in terms of what that relationship is going to look like over the next 4 years.
So what does the approach look like then from Canada's perspective?
Well, I think what you've been hearing from the federal and provincial orders of government, who have the lead on trade, it is the need for a Team Canada approach, one that brings all orders of government together with the business community and Canadians and Americans in general, because fundamentally, it's influencing Americans and getting Americans to influence their government that will ultimately bring out the kind of result that will allow us to continue to build on the historical relationship that we've had. We know that tariffs are going to be damaging not just to Canadians, they will be damaging to people on both sides of the border in terms of cost, in terms of jobs, and so on. And what we need to do is work to make sure that the new U.S. administration understands that.
You've got deep experience in politics, Mayor Verbanovic, including internationally through the Federation of Canadian Municipalities and other organizations. Is it time for Canada to maybe look a little more internally when it comes to trade and our economy?
Yeah, you know what, Mike? I think there's a few things that need to be focused on here, and this has brought everything to the forefront, and it's kind of interesting because as I look outside City Hall, I see a large Canadian flag going on the ice because, in fact, Saturday will mark the 60th anniversary of the Canadian flag on Canadian Flag Day, February 15th. And you know what? I think we need to take a little bit more of a proud approach in terms of our trade, and one that, yes, will work diligently to try and eliminate the tariffs. But on top of that, there's a few things that need to be focused on. Number one, yes, you mentioned interprovincial trade barriers. That 100% needs to happen, and that's always been a challenging issue for provincial and territorial governments to deal with. But I think they're recognizing that there needs to be a solution to this, and we can't expect to find a solution with our partners to the south if part of that doesn't look at how do we trade better between each other. Secondly, I think we need to make sure that we diversify our trade. We have a lot of solid trade agreements that actually provide the foundation of that. I think of CETA as an example, the Canada-Europe trade agreement that was signed a number of years ago that has laid the foundation for us to do that work. But, I think everybody has historically always picked the lane of least resistance, and that was with our southern trading partner. And now that we see that may not be as reliable as it has been in the past, we really need to work with those other partners to develop that. And then lastly, and this is the nature of a motion that I have coming to council today, one that a number of the big cities and others in smaller communities across Canada are undertaking, and that's really looking at our procurement policies and how can we take a little bit more of choose Canada, buy Canadian, shop local approach, and that's part of what we're looking at our staff to do, obviously within the confines of the legal agreements that exist, and in conjunction with the strategies of our federal and provincial partners.
I wanted to ask a little bit more about that motion because it really brings it home, pun intended, I suppose, because this is something that we might be able to do locally. What are you hoping comes from the motion? What might that look like?
So, listen, I mean, what the motion calls on is obviously for the government to continue to work on the tariff issue. It calls on them to, for our staff to look at how we can take a more buy Canadian preference in the procurement of goods and services where it's legally permissible, because as you know, we're subject to the trade agreements that exist, and one of the things we need to be clear on is if our neighbor isn't following the trade agreement, then what room do we have on those things? And then also, work with local businesses, area municipalities, and our associations, AMO, FCM, and so on. as well as Waterloo Region EDC and other partners, including our chambers and so on, to both advocate for the legislative and policy changes that need to happen, and to really encourage folks, through a Buy Canadian initiative to think about, how do we make sure we support local, and that's going to be important, as is our advocacy with our counterparts in the United States. One of the things that I talked about was, in fact, 20 years ago at FCM. FCM became engaged at the behest of the federal government with U.S. mayors, with the National League of Cities and the U.S. Congress of Mayors, and business and civil society to advocate for the elimination of softwood lumber tariffs. And in 2005, there was a successful agreement that was put in place, and part of the success of that happened because we were able to influence everyday Americans who understood this isn't good for me, and I think that's why this Team Canada approach now is so critical, to get people to realize that when we work together, when we trade together, we actually come up with better outcomes for everyone.
When it comes to this idea of putting local first, buying Canadian through our municipal procurement processes, Mayor Verbanovic, isn't this something maybe we should have been doing before this threat from the U.S. even existed?
So, Mike, obviously, part of the reality is that as municipalities, we're subject to follow the legislation that governs us, and that legislation comes through the provincial government, primarily in the case of municipalities. As in our Constitution, local governments are the responsibility of the provinces and territories. But in some cases, as in the USCMA, the U.S.-Canada-Mexico trade agreement, or CETA and so on, those are national trade agreements, but they have stipulations on what we can and can't do as municipalities. And so our procurement processes, are governed through provincial legislation and federally through those trade acts. And so, anything we do, we have done. We've gotten creative on some things in terms of, for example, how to support our local tech sector. And we just did a new initiative where we had a RFP, or request for proposals, from startups to solve some municipal problems. And we worked in conjunction with Communitech and others, and Velocity on that. And so I think part of it is going to be finding some of those creative ways, but also, working with our federal and provincial partners to make sure that we have the legislative authority to do what we can do.
Interesting times, to be sure, and really appreciate your perspective on all of this. Mayor Verbanovic, thanks for being here this morning.
Thanks a million for having me on, and have a great week, Mike.
You too. Bye-bye. Barry Verbanovic is the mayor of Kitchener, joins us to talk about supporting local. Buy Canadian. A motion to that effect comes to Kitchener Council later today. This is the Mike Farwell Show on 570 News Radio and Rogers TV.
What the motion calls on is obviously for the government to continue to work on the tariff issue. It calls on them for our staff to look at how we can take a more Buy Canadian preference in the procurement of goods and services where it's legally permissible, because as you know, we're subject to the trade agreements that exist. And one of the things we need to be clear on is if our neighbor isn't following the trade agreement, then what room do we have on those things?
That's Kitchener Mayor Barry Verbanovic, who will introduce later today a motion that asks city staff in Kitchener to look at what things could look like if we changed our efforts in procurement with a shop local or buy Canadian first priority, for example. And obviously, there is legislation provincially that binds what cities can do, but it'll be interesting to learn what comes of that. And I think the fair question is, why only now in the face of these tariff threats? Why haven't we been doing this for a long time. And I might ask you directly the same question. Have you made any changes? And if so, why now? Why not before? I've heard of a lot of people saying that they are foregoing trips to the United States now. They had them planned and they are changing them. Instead of going to the States, they're going to explore Quebec, for example. And you'll remember, of course, as we came out of the pandemic, there was this whole big effort on to explore Canada and some incentives to do just that. But have you changed anything in the face of these tariff threats, in the face of the threat of annexation, in the face really of a madman, it almost seems, in the Oval Office in the United States? You never know what's coming out of his mouth next. 519-570-2545, star 570, and 1-800-570-5715. Some examples of this patriotism, if you will, from across the country, some a little bit perhaps more difficult to achieve than others. A graphic artist from New Brunswick, for example, walked out onto the frozen lake near his home and used that frozen lake as his canvas and his feet as the brush. And for more than 3 hours, he was out there on the lake drawing with his feet, if you will, a 12-meter high moose in the snow cover on that lake. Now, I mean, it looks spectacular. I couldn't even begin to do it myself, but that's what he did in New Brunswick. Here in southern Ontario, a pilot with his own small two-seater plane deliberately near the border of the United States used his plane to draw a maple leaf into the skies of southwestern Ontario. And then some businesses getting into the act as well. For example, a couple of brew pubs, a brew pub with 2 locations in Quebec decided, we're not showing the Super Bowl. We're going to have a big old Super Bowl party. We're not going to air the Super Bowl at our brew pubs this weekend. A bed and breakfast owner in New Brunswick, who usually serves a glass of orange juice to her guests in the morning, is now serving local cider instead. BC-based coffee company, Kicking Horse Coffee, says, hey, and they're asking every coffee shop across the country to pick up on this. Instead of serving Americanos, let's serve Canadianos instead. No more Americanos on the coffee menu. And in one of the most famous bagel bakeries in all of the land, the Fairmount Bagel in Montreal, they have created a red and white twist bagel. And the owner of the bagel shop said she was listening to the news on the radio driving home one day, and she looked at the vehicles around her, and everybody looked so sad. So what they need is a patriotic bagel, a red and white twist. And there you have it. Some acts, symbolic as they may be, of patriotism from coast to coast. This is the Mike Farwell Show, 570 News Radio and Rogers TV. It is a Monday morning, and that means a couple of things on the show. Our usual conversation with David Drew. He brings Drew's views to the program every Monday morning at 11:30. And something we have just recently added, and I know I'm certainly enjoying, is This Week in Music History, which happens at 11, so just over an hour from now. Those regular Monday features will come your way. Speaking of regular features, on the first Tuesday of every month from 11 until noon, we have a segment with Regional Police Chief Mark Crowell and Staff Sergeant Scott Griffiths, who heads up the Traffic Services Unit with Waterloo Regional Police. Due to scheduling, we couldn't make that work on our first Tuesday last week. So just a heads up, it's happening tomorrow. The second Tuesday of the month, I'll grant you, but I just wanted to let you know with that slight change. We will have an hour with our police leaders so you can have your policing questions answered directly on the show tomorrow from 10 until 11. So just because it's a little bit different in our usual programming, I wanted to give you a heads up about it. Tomorrow morning between 10 and 11, Ask the Chief with our police leaders here in the region. You can have your policing questions answered tomorrow morning from 10 until 11. Going to get you right now an update from the 570 News Center, and then let's talk tariffs through the eyes of the local business community. Ian McLean from the Greater KW Chamber of Commerce joins us next on the Mike Farwell Show, 570 News Radio and Rogers TV. Another day, another renewed threat of tariffs on Canadian goods, which will, of course, have an impact on the Canadian economy. And since we're in Canada, that means an impact on our local economy as well. Ian McLean is the president and CEO at the Greater KW Chamber of Commerce. Joins us for a chat. Ian, good morning.
Good morning, Mike. Go Rangers.
Go Rangers indeed. Can we just talk about that for a little bit? Because it's far more uplifting.
Well, you know what? We said at the beginning of the year, this is a rebuilding year, and every time I see you, I'm thoroughly impressed with the team. They are young, but boy, oh boy, they're an exciting hockey club. And I either listen to you on the radio or watch it on Rogers, and it is it's fun to watch.
It certainly is, and they clinched a playoff spot already with that win on Saturday night. So good for the team, and some fun days ahead for sure. I guess less fun, Ian, in your role with our business community and one of our business leaders. How are you feeling under the threat, the continuing threat, it seems, of these tariffs?
Well, yeah, I reached out to you. I read your column the other day, and I usually am in general agreement, and in some large respects of your column around how we responded to it, I kind of thought to myself, do we feel helpless in response to Donald Trump's musings, and how we responded as community, things like booing of the U.S. national anthem and those sorts of things. And the question of who gets hurt. So I wanted to kind of try and draw some of this together. Say that the context, I think, is really important. And I'll draw it to the local economy, but this is not something that happens to a region or to a city. This is happening to the country. And Donald Trump has produced a response we're now seeing, right? Because we're told that and led to believe that our response is somewhat unreasonable. But when the response that we're seeing is like buy Canadian motions, that Canadian patriotism that we're seeing, and the grassroots consumer behavior, all the things that we would naturally, I certainly would expect, because people are angry and they're perplexed and angry. I am too, to be honest with you. Donald Trump's trying to disrupt, and that's what he was elected to do, but he's doing it in a way that has no consideration for trade agreements, for the law, for workers, communities, whether it's here or in the United States. And it's Canadians are expecting a strong response. We don't ordinarily get roiled and sort of, get in a fighting mood, but we're in one. And I think things like reshoring and saying, how do we have as much domestic supply and supply chains, buying Canadian, is both organic. So people are saying, what can I do myself individually? And with local governments, trying to say, hey, how should we be using tax dollars as an example? Citizens expect that. And it's not dissimilar to COVID. I mean, in a different way, but when we knew that we couldn't rely on supply chains for the things that we needed, whether it was for industry or for safety products, those sorts of things, because we couldn't rely on China, the U.S. was going in, was cutting off supplies. We did a lot of this. We pivoted. We moved our markets back here to Canada, like whether it was Eclipse Automation doing masks and other safety products. So this is just logical response. And I would say locally, some of the response and how we should respond is we're doing as our chamber. We're working closely with the Cambridge Chamber around, understanding that tariffs would hurt a large number of businesses across the board, different sectors, agriculture, manufacturing, the auto sector, construction. Just about everyone would be impacted by it. But I think as business leaders, we say the response has to be strong. And that doesn't mean that we can dollar for dollar. And, of course, the U.S. is a much, 10 times the size of our economy. But we can't be rolled by Donald Trump and what he's trying to do. So we're looking for ways that we can with our Best Waterloo group, through the Communitech and the chambers and Waterloo Economic Development, saying how do we support businesses to understand what their risk is, how that they can try and prepare, be in touch with different levels, all levels of government about how we should respond if and when these tariffs come into place, because we know that this is not a short-term thing. We got a 30-day reprieve today, as you rightfully point out. The announcement of 25% tariffs on all imports to the U.S. on aluminum and steel. We saw this movie before. It's like we're rewatching the movie from 8 years ago. But then if we take the lens out of saying, how are we in this position? Well, there's some things that Canada, as collectively over the last 30 to 40 years, we've let ourselves become so dependent on the U.S. market. So there are some things we need to do while we're managing the short term of the disruption that is likely in our local economy here. But Canada's got to, and we got to walk and chew gum. We got to manage the immediate crisis, but we have to be dealing with, and you're going to hear a lot about that from business community, is eliminating the interprovincial trade barriers. So we actually have free trade inside Canada. We haven't had comprehensive tax reform in over 40, 50 years. We need to do that. We need to take advantage of the free trade agreements we have elsewhere, so we're not so dependent on the U.S. We have free trade agreements with 50 countries around the world, and we're not taking advantage of that. And we need to do all that we need to do to have pipelines and trade enabling infrastructure to get our natural resources to global markets, so we're not dependent on the U.S. We have to do all of those things at the same time, because what this has exposed, and I think your column touched on, is we're susceptible to this sort of attack on Canada, and I think that's why it is a crisis. I think people are angry, but we need to do the hard work that needs to be done to get through the immediate crisis, but also be planning for a future that provides us more, capacity to not be so dependent on the U.S. Because what it tells me, Mike, and I honestly believe this, is the United States is not to be trusted in the same way. We have a free trade agreement that the president is just ignoring right now with these tariffs, and that's a problem. Because if you can't trust your trading partners, then you better look for new ones.
I couldn't agree more on that front. Listen, I'm up against the clock. Can you hang on a little bit longer with me this morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, sure. Thank you. I'm just going to put you on hold for a second. Ian McLean, president of the Greater KW Chamber of Commerce, joins us to talk tariffs here on the Mike Farwell Show, and we will continue this conversation. 570 News Radio and Rogers TV. We're in conversation this morning with Ian McLean, who's the president and CEO of the Greater KW Chamber of Commerce. Some great insight into how we, as a country, and of course, our economy is part of the country's economy, how we respond to these tariff threats from the United States. And Ian, I wanted to really kind of get local here as well, because I'm sure a company like, say, Toyota, for example, has got some work to do in the next 30 days, now probably 20-ish days, to prepare for this looming threat of tariffs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, listen, I was just saying before we went to break, I love that you actually have in live radio have to pay attention to the clock. Because in business to business, we never pay attention to that. But that's between live TV or live radio and a weekly radio program. Listen, let me draw that. You're absolutely right when we talk about local companies, and here's one where the tariffs don't make any sense. The North American auto sector is completely and utterly integrated. And when people talk about a product, a part in a car going before it's assembled, may cross the border 5, 6, 7 times, that's the reality. And so what I mean by that is that raw steel goes to the U.S. to a forming plant. Then it may come back and get coated with a special coating at a plant in Ontario, and then go back to the U.S. for different forming aspects and putting cushions on, and then it may come back and finally come to a place like Toyota for assembly. The reality is you cannot build a car until you have all the parts. You don't build it and say, oh, geez, we're missing that one part, but we'll still build the car. So it's totally and utterly integrated. It is not possible to affect only the Canadian auto sector. And so here's the reality with whether it's a plant in Windsor or Alliston or Cambridge or Oshawa. If there's tariffs that go on 25% in the auto space, the auto sector will close down within 4 or 5 days because just-in-time part delivery. And that means the reality of that is there's no, well, I'll just pick up my plant and leave. That takes 12, 18 months to move a parts plant to the States. What you'll have is hundreds of thousands of Americans sitting at home not working. And you'll have the same type of percentage here where you'll have lots of people sitting at home not building cars. That is a real problem. So to be prepared, someone like Toyota, I mean, they are always looking at their options. And like every business is saying, okay, where's the reliable partner that I can get my parts supply chain in place? And what this speaks to is and there are companies here. So you think about all the companies that might be affected by this, Mike. Construction companies, because of course they'll get windows and doors and all kinds of things may or may not come from suppliers in the States, and vice versa. The American construction sector, right across the board, whether it's homes or whether it's commercial buildings, relies almost exclusively on softwood lumber, as an example. Cement from Canada. This is the sheer idiocy of this plan. On tariffs by Trump on Canada makes no sense because we already have an integrated market. So, I mean, locally, here's the things that we're doing. Both as a chamber with Cambridge Chamber, but also our partners at Best Water. We're starting all the things we did during COVID. We're doing a weekly Ask the Expert. We're going to bring experts on, say, how do you prepare yourself? What are the things you need to do from a business perspective, from a supply? So we're going to bring those experts on and make it free to anybody, chamber member or not, to look at those things. We're also in constant contact with the Ontario Chamber of Commerce, the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, Communitech, all our local partners, federal and provincial governments, saying what are the programs that we need to have in place for those that are unduly and unfairly, those business sectors that are unduly and unfairly attacked by these U.S. tariffs if they come in place. And we're setting up our sector tables so that we'll have people from manufacturing and construction and retail give us the straight goods of how this may impact their business, because we need to be armed with information. We need to figure out what we can do in the short term. But ultimately, Mike, this is a wake-up call for Canadians. We can't rely on the U.S. And we can exchange Donald Trump for someone else in 4 years, but this is going to be 4 years of Donald Trump doing this, disruption campaign for his own domestic purposes, but it's going to catch a lot of people and sideswipe a lot of businesses in North America and Canada. So we can't rely on them. We need to, as they say, we'll do the local part. We'll try and work with our local partners here in Waterloo Region across Ontario and rural Canada. But we better be looking and saying, get rid of interprovincial trade barriers. Let's trade freely inside Canada, which is a great opportunity. Let's take advantage of the other agreements, like we have free trade with Europe, but we're not taking advantage of it. We need to have getting our natural resources like oil and gas and all of the products that we send. We need to get them to world markets and not be dependent on the U.S. marketplace. So, we need to fully realize the potential Canada has and not be so dependent on the U.S. And so that's going to be one of our themes is we'll deal with the local and the immediate issue, but we also cannot now forget that there's a longer term thing, which is to our, we all own the fact that for 30 to 40 years we have not done the hard work of actually preparing our economy to be in a global trading marketplace. We just haven't done those things that need to be done. And it's a little bit like saying, when's the best time to do it? It would have been 30 years ago, but the next best time is right now. So we need to get to work, roll up our sleeves, and make sure that we do the things that mean that Canadian business can invest here in Canada, create jobs here, and produce the type of country that we want with the services we expect, with an economy that is sustainable and resilient enough to withstand these sorts of global disruptions.
It is great to get your perspective on this on the show today, especially as steel and aluminum, the formal announcement expected today, and those other tariffs looming in the distance. Ian, thanks a million for making time for us.
Always a pleasure. Have a good day, Mike.
You too. Bye-bye. Ian McLean is the president and CEO of the Greater KW Chamber of Commerce, and he, along with his counterpart Greg DeRocher with the Cambridge Chamber of Commerce, you heard Ian allude to this with a recorded show versus the live show here this morning. They together, Greg and Ian, have a terrific show. If you have not listened before, it's the #1 rated business talk show on AM radio between noon and 1 Sundays. And it's right here on 570 News Radio, business to business, every Sunday, noon to 1, with Ian McLean and Greg DeRocher from the Greater KW and the Cambridge Chamber of Commerce. It is a terrific listen. And if you're a little bit skittish about what's coming when it comes to trade with our closest ally and neighbor, you'll learn so much more, among so many other things, every Sunday, noon to 1, with Business to Business. This is the Mike Farwell Show on 570 News Radio and Rogers TV. If you missed the beginning of the show today, you may have missed Paul complaining and kvetching about the fact that our federal government is currently not sitting and we need to end the vacation, aka the prorogation, and get back to work. Look, I get it. The timing is so poor on two fronts, I might add, right? Whilst we play politics both federally and provincially because we're in the midst of a snap election. Why? I think because the opportunity seemed ripe for Doug Ford and the Ontario Progressive Conservatives to earn another majority mandate and extend the life of their government beyond 2026, for example. But there's a lot going on in the world. There's so much going on with our closest neighbor and ally in the United States that it's not the time to be playing politics, but here we are. And I'm really curious. You heard Ian McLean in the last segment allude to the next 4 years with Donald Trump. I wonder if any of these Trumpisms, if you will have more staying power beyond just these 4 years. Maybe some of the things that Donald Trump puts into place, the next administration, whomever is in charge of it, thinks that they're not such bad ideas, or there may be reason to carry them a little bit further. And quite frankly, we've been talking about opening up inter-provincial trade in this country for far too long. It's too bad it really takes the face of a threat from the United States or a crisis to get moving on this. A more insulated Canadian economy may well be overdue and welcomed as we move forward economically. All right. Moving forward on this show, an update from the 570 News Center. And then it is the month of February, and that does not just mean Valentine's Day, which is Friday, by the way, fellas. Keep that in mind. It means it's time for access to necessities, period. And we'll talk about it coming up on the Mike Farwell Show. 570 News Radio and Rogers TV. It is always fun to welcome friends back into the studio. We make this an annual occasion, and I know now that we'll talk about it again once the campaign has wrapped up for another year to see how it all went. But we are now into the midst of another year of access to necessities, period. And joining me in studio, Michela Correa, who is the founder of Access to Necessities, period. Michela, good morning.
Good morning. Thanks for having us.
It's an absolute pleasure to see you. And Marissa Warner is here as well, a partner in the initiative. Good morning, Marissa.
Hello, Mike.
Michela, let's start with you and the founding of Access to Necessities, period. Where did this all begin for you?
It was an idea I had in late 2020. I had just started my real estate career, and I thought, what a great platform we have as realtors and business owners to do something in the community. And my brokerage is very involved in the community, so I thought, where can I find a niche that's just not quite being touched right now? And I thought of menstruation because that makes everyone else uncomfortable. And I have no qualms with it. And I thought I'm happy to create more of a voice for this. So I reached out to a few groups and I said, hey, is this something you're lacking and something you need in terms of resources? And they said, yes, absolutely. So I thought, okay, I'll create a donation campaign, collect some products and distribute. And I just thought I'll put it out there and see how it goes. And here we are. This is our 5th year now. And in the 4 years we've run the campaign, we've collected and donated over 53,000 menstrual products to local organizations in the community.
It's incredible.
I know.
It's incredible.
The numbers are wild. Sometimes I have to really think about it. And that impact is insane. It goes a really long way.
So, Marissa, are you like speed dial number 1 for Michaela, and that's how you ended up partnering in this initiative?
Well, we've been friends for a very long time, and it was just kind of natural, and I saw all the work that she was putting into it, and sometimes you just need like a physical extra body. She's well equipped to run the whole thing on her own if needed, but sometimes you just need an extra body. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the initiative probably started with just a general need without knowing some of the stats behind it. And the more, like the deeper you got, the more stats that were pretty alarming came to the surface, which I think created a bigger need in your heart probably.
Yeah.
That drove you more.
It even exposed me to more of the organizations we have here that I didn't even know about. There's so many different vulnerable populations, and some of them do cross over amongst the organizations. But there were some I knew nothing about, and I just thought I should be doing better as a community member and know what kind of resources we have. And I want to make sure I'm supporting all of the different ones so that we're hitting every kind of population we could be.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what have you learned, Michaela, since beginning this, when it comes to, I think, what many refer to as quote unquote period poverty?
Well, I mean, it's a bigger issue than I think we all assume it is. When we talk about vulnerable populations and their needs, we look at the basics. Shelter's an important need. Food is an important need. Safety, obviously protection for families. But we kind of take this category of menstruation and almost look at it as an extra or a plus item that's not a necessity, when really it has to do with human physiology and basic hygiene and health needs. So I feel like the period poverty community is trying to regroup it as a basic necessity and making themselves a little bit louder on behalf of women to say, we already will put ourselves last in so many different ways. This needs to be brought to the forefront to make sure those needs are taken care of for themselves while they're trying to navigate, other difficult waters. So,
So true. Put yourself last in so many ways. Could not agree more.
Yeah.
And I think for me, like, probably the most sobering stat would be 1 in 4 Canadian women have to choose between food and menstrual hygiene products. And so many of them are moms. And we're both moms. And just the thought of having to choose between that, because if you're choosing between food and feminine hygiene products, you're also choosing between that for you and your children.
Yeah.
It's not just even for you. So for me, that's just really alarming. What, 25%, 1 in 4?
Yeah.
Like, it's just...
And that's in our community. That's not just like a national stat. That's here at home. Those are our neighbors, our friends, people we wouldn't even know need that help.
So I'm trying to wrap my head around. I know the two of you are here as, leaders on this initiative, but 53,000 period products over the 4 years so far of this campaign. Where the hell do you store them all? Like, how does all of this work from a logistics perspective? I can just imagine what it's like through February.
Well, my office is I'll maybe share something on social later today, but my office is starting to get like the boxes and the bags. Honestly, my basement is, again, very humble beginnings. We just started collecting, and I said, I'll keep them at home because I also didn't know how big it was going to be. I thought maybe I'll get a couple hundred products and that would be amazing. So I store everything in my basement, and then usually March, April is when we arrange the annual drop-off. So we reach out to all the organizations. We have an amazing volunteer, Trish, hi Trish, who helps us out with all of the drop-offs. And we usually pack up several bags or boxes and allocate them to the organizations. And then we keep any surplus just because they also have limited storage facilities because they're usually storing a good handful of different items. So we give them everything we can at that time, and then we just continue to supplement through the year. And you can imagine, you think it'd be sitting in my house for months, it goes very quickly.
Very quickly.
And the bigger we got, the more groups we've reached out to say, we have this, do you need it? We're happy to kind of share it with you. So it's a small storage timeline, and then we allocate things as quickly as we can so that they have the resources.
Yeah, and that inventory is very well organized. So after our donation campaign in February, we have a very fun organizing party.
Yes.
Lots of music.
With coffee and Baileys. None for me this year, but you can have my Baileys.
And nice sweet treats, and it's really good. And we spend hours organizing everything because there's some facilities and partnerships as well that request certain items over others. And we like to facilitate that need. We don't want to give them something that isn't going to be used. So we do try. And that organization really, in terms of inventory organization, really helps facilitate those specific requests because they do vary. And depending on the demographic, and sometimes it depends too on their facilities and what they have access to as well. Some things that a Diva cup, for example, that is reusable isn't feasible because of hygiene reasons, because of where they are living or not living. So we do have to provide disposable products that is more appropriate for them. So we do really try to accommodate that request as much as we can.
Marissa Warner, Michaela Correa are the founders and partners in Access to Necessities, period. The campaign is underway again for another year. How can you support it? How does this all get distributed when all is said and done? We'll continue the conversation in studio this morning on the Mike Farwell Show, 570 News Radio and Rogers TV. Michaela Correa and Marissa Warner in studio with us this morning. Access to Necessities, period. For a fifth year, the campaign is underway. Let's get down to brass tacks here, Michaela. How can we support the work that you're doing here?
Yeah, there's a few ways. We've also tried to evolve this over the last few years to make the campaign as accessible as possible to everyone. So maybe I'll talk about product donation and you can talk about the new thing we're doing this year.
Oh, there's a new thing.
There's a new
I
thing.
like new things. Okay.
We are innovative ladies.
Yes.
Product donations always been kind of the core of the campaign so that we can have the physical products. And that way, too, we're in control of allocating them because sometimes you contribute to different causes and you don't really see where things are going. You don't see that end goal, whereas we're very open about it. So product donation, we've always encouraged people to collect, whether they do it themselves or maybe on behalf of friends and family. We will go do pickups at an agreed upon location, or we will do drop-offs at an agreed upon location. So that's how it started. And then we expanded to what we call our community partners. So we reached out to a few businesses we know and love in the community and said, would you guys be open to housing like a cute pink box for the month of February where we can encourage community members to go drop off their donations during your business hours? We got resounding yeses almost immediately. So we have a handful of them. Now I have to look at my list because I am pregnant and my brain is consumed with growing a human.
Baby brain.
Yes. And I don't want to miss anybody because we appreciate them so much. So we have Champagne Insurance, Elmira Door and Trim, Cove Collective, Truth Beauty Company, Encompass Health and Wellness, StoneX, and The Womb in Guelph. So between Guelph, St. Jacobs, Waterloo, Kitchener, Elmira, we have a pretty good spread, hoping that that opens up how many people are able to, pop by a local location and drop products off. So that's always been like the, bread and butter, if you will, of the campaign. But we did start something new this year.
Yeah. What we wanted to do is because sometimes whether it is a comfort thing or just geographical location, they can't get us donations. We have a donation link now to do a monetary contribution and donation. That way we will take that money and we will actually go and purchase once the donation campaign is over. And we see some of the products that we might still need that were short because we didn't get them in our donation campaign. We will Michaela and I will probably make a fun party of going to buy a lot more product. Run. Yes. And we're going to take that money and go and purchase products. And for my own following online, I do have a very far-reaching following, and it just allows more people to support us. And so you can get that donation link directly on my website, which is thehomenarrative.com, and it will take you directly to that. And you can make a monetary donation. Any amount is appreciated. It does not matter.
We can't stress that enough. Like $5 can go a very long way.
Okay.
Yeah. So every little bit really does help us.
All right. Thehomenarrative.com is the website you can go to. Information is there about access to necessities period, that link where you can make a monetary donation. And then when the month of February wraps up, you alluded to that kind of organizing party that happens later. This, again, the two of you are here and terrific leaders on this initiative, but it must take a small army of support to get this all organized every year.
Yeah, I mean, we definitely couldn't do it without the response that we receive.
Yeah.
And even, there's people that have been donating to us since the beginning. And I think there's so much power in people just spreading the message. Like, yes, we're here and we're doing this, but even just word of mouth between friends and family members at the hockey rink,
Absolutely.
One parent chatting to another. We cannot, emphasize how much that makes a difference, especially in the, period poverty community, because it's just not something that I find is naturally coming up in conversations. So we're kind of trying to plant these seeds and get people talking about it, and just hoping it continues to spread like wildfire and just get more people supporting us. I will say a lot of women support us. We need to see the men step up a little bit more, but we have also had a lot of our industry colleagues in the construction industry be massive supporters. And I think we need more of that to just get everyone a little more comfortable with talking about it and contributing. It doesn't have to be this kind of big, scary, awkward conversation to have. So we really appreciate that too.
We do.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it is that expansion. And we do have such great colleagues in the construction world that are so fantastic, and they want to support us. And
and there's no stigma there for them. No. They just want to do good things. Yeah.
But you're right. Like, there are a lot of repeat donations that are made, and my little guys in hockey go Waterloo Wolves. So there's a lot of hockey moms that have, say, like book clubs.
Yeah.
That they get together for their book club, and on that night they receive donations from everybody in their book club or wine club or whatever club you have. They do that, and that's really awesome too. We love that. And it brings a smile to our face, because those repeat donations, we count on those. We really do. And our community partners, they shout it from the rooftops, which we love so much. And Trish, our volunteer, is a big
she's our biggest fan.
Yes.
She's always the best with sharing the campaign, supporting us. What do you need? How can I help? She's amazing.
And a lot of the back end stuff is, late night text and emails between
planning,
the two of us for months on end. So there's a lot of work that goes behind it. So for the month of February, we would love any kind of support and donation.
All right. I'm going to direct you to thehomenarrative.com once again. That's the website you can visit. You'll find a link there where you can make a monetary donation. Michaela, Marissa, good on you. Like, I love that we are normalizing this conversation, being very public and open about it, reducing some of that stigma. I think you're well positioned, given the work that you do connected to real estate, to reach those important networks. So thanks for being here again. And I look forward to the follow-up conversation about how well it went again this year, okay?
You know.
Beautiful. Thanks both for being here.
Thank you so much,
Thanks, Mike.
Michaela Correa and Marissa Warner. Access to necessities, period, on the Mike Farwell Show this morning. 570 News Radio and Rogers TV. If you are one of my 9 a.m.ers on the show, first and foremost, thank you, and a shout out to the 9 a.m.ers, those who are here from the beginning every day. And every day when we start the show, we start it with a different piece of music that's got some connection to this day in music history. So if you're a 9 a.m.er, not only do you get some sincere thanks from yours truly, but you got a little sneak preview about one of the things we will be talking about during this week in music history today. We do it every Monday at 11, so the segment is coming up just after your update from the 570 News Center. And yes, that song that started the show today at 9 a.m. figures into this week in music history. Also, somebody that you would have seen at the Super Bowl last night. I saw this particular person a couple of times, and I wasn't even paying that much attention. But that singer-songwriter will feature into this week in music history this week. And what started as just a little sketch on Saturday Night Live turned into a movie, and dare I say, it was a big box office success. We'll touch on that during this week in music history today as well. It's something that we do every Monday morning at 11, take a little bit of a look back because, you know, a lot of us who listen to talk radio today had our roots in music radio, particularly rock music. And so we'll take a look back at this week in music history coming up on the Mike Farwell Show. This is 570 News Radio.
Oh yeah, I'll tell you something I think you'll understand. When I say that something, I wanna hold your hand. I wanna hold your hand. I wanna hold your hand. Oh, please say to me.
Those are the Beatles, you know. I thought I would just let you know, just in case you were unsure, that it's the Beatles that begin our week in music history. A look back we do every Monday morning at this time with our fellow musicologist, Brian Allison, who joins the program. Brian, good morning.
Good morning, Mike.
It was a big week for the Beatles on this week in music history, wasn't it?
You know what? I could add a Beatles story almost every week because they have such a rich history, and they always come up in the highlights. There's always a Beatles story, but there's a couple this week that are extra big ones, so I thought we better highlight those.
It's funny you say that because, yes, of course, they would come up so frequently, and yet in such a relatively short period of time that they were together. I mean, we're not talking the Rolling Stones or Rush here together for decades. These guys were about a decade and then poof, gone.
Barely. I mean, their professional career really only lasted about 7 years. 63 was when they started playing some professional gigs, getting paid, you know, above and beyond sort of smaller clubs. And then they broke up in 1970. So 7 years was, you know, pretty much the lifespan of the Beatles. So not a long career, but they just have endured, just given their legacy. It's all to me about the songwriting. I mean, you just can't match some of the body of work that Lennon and McCartney put together over those short 7 years.
And this week in music history features a first ever appearance on one of the biggest television shows of the time, and also their first appearance under their quote-unquote new name. They didn't start with just the Beatles as the band's name.
That's right. And it was yesterday, February the 9th, 1964, that they made their first appearance on the Ed Sullivan Show, which was really for the genre ground zero for the Beatles to begin. It just exploded from there forward. They were, and it's important to remember, the Beatles were already a pretty big band in England. They had a bunch of number one hits, and it was actually Ed Sullivan who went over there to see them perform and was just blown away by the fervor of the fans and said, I think maybe I could bring these guys onto my show. And by the time they got to America in February 1964, they had a number one hit on the charts. So they had broken through, and this performance on the Ed Sullivan Show just just pushed it right through the glass ceiling, and that was it. The show itself, again, was on a Sunday, February 9th. That's when Ed Sullivan aired. 728 in-studio seats. They received over 50,000 applications for tickets to see that show in person. And the record-breaking audience that watched on television was about 73 million viewers, which at the time was the largest television audience in history. So pretty amazing. And then the other date that I think doesn't get talked about enough is that the same date, February 9th, 1961, just 3 short years earlier, the Beatles appeared for the first time under the name The Beatles. They were formerly called the Silver Beatles. They decided to drop the silver and go with just the Beatles. And that 1961, February 9th, was the first day they performed under that day, under the famed Cavern Club in Liverpool, where they would play several hundred shows over the following years.
Amazing stuff. Not the Silver Beatles, but just the plain old Beatles. And of course, nothing really plain about them. My 9 a.m.ers today, Brian, those who have been with us since the beginning of the show at 9 o'clock, heard a song to start the show that had some significance on this date in music history. And I chose Running with the Devil by Van Halen today.
I was one of your 9 a.m.ers, Mike, so I heard it and I was like, oh, he's priming for the story of the day. So it was actually today, February 10th, 1978, that the debut album by Van Halen was released. And it was a big, big record. It was probably one of the biggest debuts in history, included the hits Running with the Devil. They did a cover of the Kinks' You Really Got Me, which hit pretty big. But it was really the guitar playing of Eddie Van Halen that just encapsulated this album and really reinvented guitar playing. I mean, you can't say enough about what Eddie Van Halen did for the guitar as an instrument. I remember hearing in 1978 that album for the first time. I was a young 8-year-old, and even then thinking to myself, like, this is like listening to somebody from Mars play the guitar. I've never heard anything like that before. And he spawned tons and tons of imitators. Everybody was doing the taps and the harmonics after Eddie, but he was the originator, and it just turned music in a whole new direction. The album went on to sell an amazing number of copies. It's still one of the best selling debut albums in history. So that was released, 1978 today.
And the guy that I saw on a couple of occasions, the camera panned over to his box at the Super Bowl yesterday. He was not there, though, with his ex, Heather Mills, but Sir Paul McCartney features into this week in music history.
Yep, tomorrow it was the anniversary of them finalizing their divorce settlement. So he was married to Heather Mills, of course, after his late wife Linda had passed away. And Paul McCartney, to me, strikes me as a pretty smart guy, especially when it comes to business. I think over the years he's established himself as a very astute businessman. Strangely, entering into his young relationship with Heather Mills, he did not have a prenuptial agreement. And we're talking about a guy who's worth over $1 billion easily at that time. No prenuptial agreement. So Miss Mills decided that she was going to get some of that. And she was seeking a settlement of about 125 million pounds, which is roughly $250,000. So $250 million she was looking for, which at the time would have been one of the largest divorce settlements in history. And they bantered back and forth. A lot of the divorce experts were saying, she should probably expect about 60 million pounds, so $120 million. She settled on 24 million pounds as a one-time payout for her marriage. And then, of course, they had a daughter, Beatrice, and I believe Paul is continuing to pay child support, which I would imagine is a pretty good penny as well when you're Sir Paul McCartney.
Absolutely. Sir Paul and Heather Mills finalizing their divorce on February 11th, this date in music history. All right. I mentioned before the 11 o'clock news, it was a sketch on Saturday Night Live that turned into, dare I say, a pretty big movie. We'll talk about that and more as we continue our conversation It's a weekly conversation, Mondays at 11, with Brian Allison, musicologist. This week in music history on the Mike Farwell Show, 570 News Radio and Rogers TV. Every Monday morning at 11, we are joined by musicologist Brian Allison for a look back at this week in music history. Some tidbits that you will likely enjoy as we share some stories of music past. And Brian, I guess this week in music history was not all fun and games for The Doors, a very well-known and highly regarded band.
Absolutely, 100%. The Doors had a very short lifespan, just a few years in the late 60s, and then, of course, tragically lost Jim Morrison in 1971 to an overdose or alcoholism. Never really been determined, but one or the other was probably the result of his death. So we fast forward over 30 years, and two of the remaining members of the band decided that they're going to reform the Doors. And this is, again, like 30 years after Morrison had passed away. So it was a long time before this happened. So Ray Manzarek, who was the original keyboard player, and Robbie Krieger, who was the guitarist, they decided that they're going to go out on the road with a new version of, quote-unquote, The Doors. And they recruited ex-cult singer Ian Astbury and Stuart Copeland, who, of course, was the drummer for the Police, and said, we're going to go out and tour as The Doors. And John Densmore, who was the original drummer for The Doors, said, wait a minute here. I don't think this is cool because, first of all, I wasn't included, and I'm in The Doors. Second of all, it shouldn't be called The Doors if someone other than Jim Morrison is singing. So they bantered back and forth, and I think what they settled on was that they were going to be able to essentially call themselves a tribute to The Doors, but not officially The Doors in quotation marks. So it begs the question, when is the reforming of a group not really a reforming of the group? And I know this has happened to countless bands over the years, but I don't know. What are your thoughts on it? Let's use an example that you and I can relate to. Okay, if Geddy and Alex said tomorrow that they're going to reform Rush and tour with a new drummer, is it still Rush?
No. And I feel that way across the board. I mean, I take Rush very personally, as I know you do, and you know that I do, which is why you would use it as the example. But, is Journey without Steve Perry? I mean, I don't know. I can't really get behind it.
There's a fine line there for me too. I feel like some bands, most bands have had lineup changes. There are very, very few bands in rock and roll history that have endured with the exact same lineup as when they formed. I think probably one of the only ones might be U2, because they're the same four guys that formed the band in high school and they're still together today, never having had a lineup change. But most other bands, in fact, almost all other bands have had changes. And most of them will retain the title. So where do you draw the line at, okay, is this still the band? I mean, the Doobie Brothers were recently in Kitchener. They played the Auditorium. Or has it happened yet? I'm not sure. I think it might be coming up.
No, I think it did happen, yeah.
It did happen,
yeah.
Okay. So the Doobie Brothers, there's no original Doobie Brother members left in that band. It's all new guys. So is it still the Doobie Brothers, or should it be called, a tribute to the Doobie Brothers, or the new Doobie Brothers, or whatever you want to call it? It's a topic that gets a lot of attention, for sure, among fans.
It's an excellent question, and one that could be debated forever, no question about it. But let's move on, because this little Saturday Night Live sketch that turned into a pretty darn big movie had its debut on This Week in Music History.
Who would have thought?
I know.
World, that quirky little sketch that, we all loved. I was in university when that came out in 1992 or 1991 when they first started doing it on SNL, and we all giggled and laughed, and everybody knew probably a couple of guys like Wayne and Garth. That's probably why it hit so close to home. But they just, they decided, well, we can make a feature film out of this. It's popular enough that we could do a movie. And they did, and it became a massive success and went on. I think there was at least one sequel, might have even been more, but I know of one for sure. And one of the feature scenes in the movie was, of course, the famous scene where the guys are driving along in the Pinto, I think it was, and put on some Bohemian Rhapsody by Queen and just rock out to it. And it was such a hit that Bohemian Rhapsody re-entered the charts. and came back onto the charts and was a hit for a second time. So it had a second lifetime, thanks to this great little movie that did very well. And I think there was another Easter egg. Did you see the Bohemian Rhapsody movie?
I did.
Okay, there's a scene in that, I don't know if you picked up on it, but Mike Myers plays Queen's record company executive, and they're trying to sell Bohemian Rhapsody to him, and he's going, this is garbage. Like, nobody's, and I think he even says something like, nobody's ever going to drive in their car blaring Bohemian Rhapsody, and this is Mike Myers, who played Wayne back in Wayne's World and was blaring Bohemian Rhapsody in the car. So it was a funny little full circle scene.
I'm embarrassed to acknowledge that it never even occurred to me to make that connection, but a terrific connection it is. And Brian, first of all, Stan Mikita, Chicago Blackhawks hockey jersey, and if she was president, she'd be Abraham Lincoln.
100%. The movie and the skit, it was just full of so many catchphrases. I mean, which of us weren't going around in 1992 going, no way, like there were so many catchphrases in it, and it just got legs of its own, and of course the music in the movie just made it that much more enjoyable.
So many times when we look back at music history, there is a note of tragedy, and oftentimes it seems to be around travel, but in a plane. In this particular case, we look back at this day or this week in music history and find a car crash that claimed a band.
Yeah, it's not a well-known story. So an English indie band, they were called Viola Beach, and they were just sort of gaining some legs in the UK and around Europe, playing dates. They had just played a festival. 4 members of the band, Chris Leonard, River Reeves, Thomas Lowe, and Jack Dakin, along with their manager, Craig Tyree, died in a single vehicle car accident in Sweden. So they were crossing a bridge, which was an E4 motorway bridge, and it's typically will open to let a boat pass underneath. And apparently they got too close to the edge. The car tipped off and fell, and all 4 members and their manager died in this terrible accident. So yeah, Viola Beach. If you want to look them up, there are some videos on YouTube and some music to be heard. They sound like they were going to, it was going to be a band that was going to take off and were going to do very well. And it just tragically ended on February 13th, 2016 in this single accident. So we remember those guys this week.
Certainly. And we'll also remember, but not because he has passed, because he is a musical luminary celebrating a birthday. I remember listening to music radio, Brian, and they'd be counting down, the 100 best or 200, whatever it was. And Salisbury Hill almost always ended up at or very near number 1. That's why this guy stands out to me. And of course, before there was Phil Collins with Genesis, there was this guy.
Just iconic. Peter Gabriel, of course. 1950, he was born February 13th, 1950. So Peter is turning 75 years old. Again, I can't reiterate how old it makes me feel when my some of my favorite rock stars are well into their 70s. So Peter Gabriel turning 75 this week, and yeah, what a body of work. I mean, you can look back on all of his solo albums were just classics. So many hit songs, and then not to be forgotten, but the work that he did with Genesis was just phenomenal. A little bit of a different work, a little bit more progressive, less poppy, of course, but Peter Gabriel, just huge, absolutely. So happy birthday to Peter Gabriel this week. Mark
it down on Thursday and celebrate accordingly Peter Gabriel's birthday. Brian, go ahead.
I'm going to spin some Sledgehammer on February 13th in honor of Peter's birthday.
I have fond memories of that one from the 80s as well. I'll definitely do Salisbury Hill and maybe even pull out some old Genesis. I love doing this. Thanks again for being here this week.
My pleasure, Mike. I'll talk to you next Monday.
Look forward to it. Bye-bye.
Okay, later.
Brian Allison, a musicologist who joins us every Monday, 11 o'clock, for a little look back at this week in music history. It's part of the Mike Farwell Show on 570 News Radio and Rogers TV. On Mondays, we move from one regular segment, This Week in Music History, to another with Drew's Views, when we get David Drew's unique perspective on all things political. David usually provides to me in advance some notes about what he wants to talk about. He has not done that today, which means, like Forrest Gump's box of chocolates, you never know what you're going to get. Coming up next on the Mike Farwell Show, this is 570 News Radio and Rogers TV.
Has anybody heard from Crazy Dave? Has anybody heard from Crazy Dave? Has anybody heard from Crazy Dave? Now, that cat couldn't spell to win a bet, but he carried this battered notebook full of his poetry. More soul per square word than the Lord's Prayer. He was the kind of guy that called a spade a shovel, and a violin a fiddle, and a lady ma'am. And I don't even know why I think of him now. Maybe because he never told me a lie he'd have to apologize for later. Because he'd speak to a guy straight, eyeball to bloodshot eyeball, like he'd never even had a secret.
David Drew is the owner of Negotiating Change, Government Relations and Stakeholder Engagement Strategies. David joins us every Monday morning, 11:30 for Drew's Views. Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Stop coming in here so sunny with your happy disposition because you liked the snow on the weekend, okay? Be miserable about it like me, if you don't mind.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Grr.
That sounds like me. Sounds like me. Are you ready? Are you ready for the tariffs? Steel and aluminum today, my friend.
Steel and aluminum today. You know, it was kind of funny because Doug Ford called a tariff election, and then we lost all the tariffs. And it was like, well, what's this election? But now we have a brand new set of tariffs to campaign on. So that's kind of cool. But you got to pity all the opposition everywhere. You've got to pity them because now Donald Trump has set himself up to be the opponent for everyone. So if you're Pierre Poilievre, if you're Doug Ford, you're not running against Marit Stiles. You're not running against Bonnie Crombie. You're running against Donald Trump. And you've got all these people from the NDP and the Liberals who are really cheesed, and to some degree justifiably, that it's not like this guy's ever sitting down with Donald Trump to negotiate. That's the federal government's job. But it's the story of the day, and Doug Ford has made sure that he is part of it. And you can't have the opposition parties sitting there saying, well, this is how we would handle that differently, because there's a credibility issue. And this is also where Pierre Poilievre is starting to lose some ground. It's really hard to be the part of the conversation that is international in focus when you are the leader of the opposition. And one historian I was listening to said that this was back in the 25% on everything phase, not what we're talking about today, but this was the most existential threat to Canada since the War of 1812. Of course, there's going to be a rally around the flag effect. So Doug Ford and Justin Trudeau, or the Liberal Party federally, are going to be benefiting from the fact that we have this external opponent. Boy, though, it's really not that fair to the oppositions who are trying to put something forward right now. And just before we move on, like Bonnie Crombie and Marit Stiles, I think, is the most fascinating part of the provincial election, because if you look at the polling, the Liberals are ahead of the NDP. But when you look at who's best for a particular issue, healthcare, education, the NDP are ahead of the Liberals on almost all of them. And the one that I recall that they're not is negotiating with Donald Trump, which I don't think anybody is voting on provincially, really. But the NDP are not getting the numbers that their fundamentals would suggest. So it's either, you have the leadership on the one side and the policy deficiency on the other, and the policy excess on one side with the leader. So what does that mean? So to me, if I'm going to pick on Kitchener-Conestoga, if I am Jody Szymanski for the NDP, I am going to be leading, so to speak, with my issues and my solutions, and ending with Marit Stiles putting these forward. So I'm going to be using the issues to build credibility for me and my leader. If I'm Joe Gowan for the Liberals in that riding, I'm going to be doing kind of the opposite thing. I'm going to be saying Bonnie Crombie understands, and that's why we have a plan for. So I'm going to be using my leader's credibility to bring my policy numbers up. But that's not something you see very, very often at all, where a party that has such a clear lead on issues is behind on the voter ballot. So one of those is going to change. Either the Liberals are going to start going up and tightening on the issues, or Bonnie Crombie's numbers are going to come down a little bit relative to Marit Stiles.
You think Bonnie Crombie has greater credibility than Marit Stiles?
I think she has greater name recognition. And let's be honest, that is 90% of the game. That's where, Pierre Poilievre had such an advantage because he was a household name for being a jerk long before. And I say that somewhat affectionately because it's his brand. Eating an apple while a reporter's asking you a dumb question, it's kind of a jerk move, but I was laughing my butt off while he did it. So I don't say that as it is.
All right. One more quick thing on Donald Trump. And I mentioned this to you during the news update, but it seems to me like we're awaiting the quote-unquote formal announcement of 25% tariffs on steel and aluminum today, which came about yesterday when the president's on Air Force One en route to a football game. It just seems to me that in the presence of a camera and or microphone, Donald Trump cannot help himself. And I don't know how we respond and or react to a leader like that right next door.
I'm a little bit more afraid of this than I was last week, to be honest, because I was listening to, you remember last week I was talking about the Monroe Doctrine and how, up until World War I, the U.S. was looking north to Canada and saying, if they're not going to use their land, why don't we just take it? Because we know how to use it. And I heard, what's his face, the federal minister, Francois, anyway, and he was saying, we have all these critical minerals they need. So we have this strategic asset we need to use. We have the entire Arctic at our disposal. We have these assets to bring to the table. And I think it was Matt Gurney who first said, these assets are actually weaknesses if we don't exploit them. So we have this ring of fire that we have not been able to build a road to for 20 years. And it's filled with all these critical minerals. If we can't get them out of the ground, maybe the U.S. will show up and do it themselves. Our Arctic sovereignty, we don't have any. If we're not going to exercise it, someone will. And if we are not, the U.S. is very, very worried about who the other person will be. So they are going to. All of these things that we used to look at as assets are now kind of liabilities because they're just making us targets. And we have not exercised our sovereignty in any of these cases. So it's kind of scary, eh?
It is a wee bit. There's no question about it. Okay, let's come back to what you were talking about a moment ago when it comes to being in opposition and the difficult position one finds themselves in today if they are in opposition, trying to gain traction when Donald Trump, David, is sucking the oxygen out of everything. We've got a provincial election underway. They're campaigning now. A federal election is imminent in the next couple to a few months, I would say. How does anyone make any noise domestically when Donald Trump is igniting things globally?
It's not just challenging because of, it's hard to break through that message barrier of this is all about Donald Trump, but it's also when you're in situations like this, if you criticize Justin Trudeau about something that has nothing to do with the trade war, it's very different than criticizing Justin Trudeau in, let's say, quote, peacetime, end quote. Right now, criticizing the government is a lot more like criticizing the state because we are in the state of existential threat. It's kind of hard. And that's why Doug Ford has tried to do so much to wrap himself in this trade war because it makes it hard to criticize him on almost anything because he's the guy who's defending us. It's really amazing, but even harder is, it's just the two parts. So it's number one, how do you even get into that conversation? And then number two is how do you differentiate yourself? You have these two challenges that are exponentially harder than without a crisis like this. It's like COVID. Remember how the Liberal numbers went up during COVID? Remember how Doug Ford's numbers went up during COVID? Well, yeah, they were the only game in town. They were coming out on the steps and doing their press conferences, and all the opposition people are locked away in their bunkers wearing masks. This is a very, very similar situation where Trump muses, you go immediately to get reactions, and the most important reactions are to get it from the government, not from the opposition party. You will hold off on your story to wait for that quote from Trudeau. You will not hold off to wait for Jagmeet Singh's reaction. So it's impossible for them. It's sad.
It is sad. And I'm thinking now because we had a caller earlier today who was very upset that the federal government here is, quote unquote, on vacation. The prorogation in Paul's mind is a vacation. But the reality is, David, opposition parties, primarily the Conservatives, want to reinforce the idea that we have no government right now. Well, Justin Trudeau's out there being very prime ministerial, if I do say so myself.
How so?
How so? He was the one that headed that summit last week with all kinds of people to talk about the economy.
Oh, the one where they couldn't get the sound system right.
Yes, the one where they couldn't get the sound system right.
Let's talk about that. Isn't that kind of amazing how they threw the reporters out of the room but didn't turn off the sound system in the lobby until the message of the day had been delivered surreptitiously? Is there a better way to force a headline than to let reporters think they scored something?
Listen, all I'm trying to say is this current prorogation is not hurting the Liberals one bit. Not one bit, my friend.
Oh, well, I agree. It's not hurting them one bit. But sooner or later, we're going to have to spend some money to deal with this. Sooner or later, government employees are going to need to be paid. And that's coming up at the end of March. We'll see. Like if Donald Trump had not backed down on the tariffs, I'm not sure there's enough money in the kitty authorized to be spent. And then they talk about, well, we could reallocate. Okay, so I have two questions. Where are you going to pull the money from? And then if we didn't need it there, why were we putting it there in the first place? You know what I mean? Like you always talk about, oh, there's no fat in the system. There's no fat in the system. Well, apparently we can reallocate billions of dollars if there's a real threat. I think our debt's a real threat, so maybe we should just be doing this on an ongoing basis.
I could not agree more.
It's amazing how the impossible becomes possible when there's motivation.
The motivation should be the defending against Donald Trump.
Well, the motivation should be that all this spending is kind of stupid anyway, and if you don't need to spend it, why are you spending it? And it takes somebody like Donald Trump to come along and tell us that, you have no defense on your northern border. Your southern border is not secure. Which paper was it where they had the moment where Donald Trump stopped taking us seriously on fentanyl? And it was it was the Bureau, so maybe I shouldn't quote it, but it was about a relationship that Justin Trudeau had with a fentanyl importer. And it was one of those ones that was at arm's length and no, you shouldn't agree about it. But when notified about it, the Prime Minister's office didn't seem to take it seriously.
We had similar questions earlier today when we have Buy Canadian reports being sought municipally when it comes to how we procure for municipal projects and purchases. Why weren't we doing this before there was some sort of imminent threat from south of the border?
Well, there is an argument to be made that you shouldn't be spending extra to go local.
Yes. I thought of that for sure.
Yeah. No, and that's just it. Like I say, well, how much am I willing to spend to keep the money in the economy?
Bingo.
And I don't know.
I don't know.
I really don't know. That's just it. Like, is it 5%? Is that reasonable? Is it 10%? I don't know. Is it 100%? Oh, gosh, no. But that's just it. I have no idea what that scale should be. So, and I would really want it to be informed by economists, not politicians.
I might be inclined to buy into a 10% buy local premium, but I don't know.
I think it would be, that's just it. I think it would be different for, manufactured products versus construction versus produce versus I don't think you're going to come up with one number that's nice and easy that makes sense.
David Drew is the owner of Negotiating Change, Government Relations, Stakeholder Engagement Strategies. He's with us every Monday morning at 11:30 for Drew's Views on the Mike Farwell Show, 570 News Radio and Rogers TV.
Now, 5 Minutes with Farwell, where your business comes first.
And we are joined this morning by Faisal Susiwala, broker of record with RE/MAX Twin City, Faisal Susiwala Realty. Faisal, good morning.
Good morning, Mike. How are you?
I'm doing very well, thank you. How about yourself?
I'm very well as well. Thank you.
Glad to hear that. Let's talk first about the market here in the region of Waterloo. How's the real estate market looking here early in February?
So let's go back to January for a moment. And January was fairly quiet. We didn't see a lot of activity. Of course, there were a lot of factors that contributed to that, including, what's happening south of the border and just sort of that interest rate announcement, which was taken very positively. Now we're trying to see how that lag in activity will translate into February. We're starting to see buyers starting to enter the market, more so on the resale side of things, not so much on the new home sales, though.
Faisal, one of the dominant stories in the headlines in the news lately is tariffs, and we're talking about them again today. Any impact on the real estate sector when it comes to tariffs?
Well, yeah, the tariffs have a ripple effect on the Canadian housing market. There's just no way around it. So depending on which goods are targeted. So, tariffs on materials like lumber, steel, aluminum, drywall, all of that would raise the cost for builders. And builders are already having some challenges. So just imagine adding 25% to their costs. Those costs have to be passed down to buyers, making new homes even more expensive. So, but it also impacts renovation costs. So if tariffs increase the price of imported building materials, home renovations will become pricier, affecting homeowners and flippers. So again, that resale market lags behind as well. So we could see home improvements being, slowing down, people not wanting to do those things because of the higher costs. So all of this will start having an impact. And of course, inflation occurs, which affects interest rates, higher construction costs will contribute to inflation. I mean, there's such a huge ripple effect here. Cost of borrowing goes up, and it just makes things a little bit more difficult. Foreign investment stops, trade relations get affected. So all of these things start impacting. And then, when you get the foreign buyers not buying in Canada, that impacts our commercial real estate sector as well.
So with this kind of instability, because we're never sure from one day really to the next, does that kind of keep you on edge as you monitor the housing market?
Yeah, so we're seeing a lot of, just some uncertainty, right? And when there's uncertainty in the market, people have a tendency to just sit and do nothing. So we're seeing all of that demand that we were expecting to come into January and February just sort of sit on the sidelines again and waiting to see what happens next, especially with, whether or not the Bank of Canada will cut interest rates on March 12th.
Yeah, you had me wondering about that too. And we know there is another announcement from the Bank of Canada coming up. Any idea of what we can expect when that announcement comes?
So it's interesting. The odds dropped after a strong job growth, right? So Canada's unemployment rate fell to 6.6% in January from 6.8%. So 76,000 jobs were added, which is beating the expected 25,000 jobs that they were expecting. So the rate cut drop, had the chances of that went from 80% to 55% after the unemployment trends. So we could see a 0.25% drop on March 12th, but it's almost a 50-50 whether or not it will happen. But the outlook is still that by the end of 25, coming into 26, we'll see further cuts, which will allow the affordability to come back into the market. And we do still see forecasts of increasing growth in the market from 1.8% to 2%. So I think there's some value still in the market to get out there, look at buying. And again, I've said this before that, yes, rates may not drop, but prices have not gone up either. So there's still an opportunity to get into the market right now.
Really good information, as always. Really appreciate the perspective as well. Faisal, thanks for being here.
My pleasure. Great talking to you.
Faisal Susiwala is a broker of record with RE/MAX Twin City. Faisal Susiwala Realty. You can find him online at homeshack.com and reach Faisal by phone at 519-624-5555.
5 Minutes with Farwell, where success matters on 570 News.
We are fast approaching the noon hour, at which time we'll get you an update from the 570 News Center, and then you know what's next, right? In fact, you're already queuing up on our phone lines. Noon to 1 every day, we open the phones. Well, I mean, they're open every day from the minute we start the show, but wide open so you can share your thoughts on something we talked about during the show today or anything else that happens to be on your mind. On Mondays, it's tradition for us to rant or rave. Rant because something's got you upset. Rave because you're happy about something. The next hour is for your rants or raves here on the Mike Farwell Show. This is 570 News Radio and Rogers TV.
Take out the papers and the trash, or you don't get no spending cash. If you don't scrub that kitchen floor, you ain't gonna rock and roll no more. Yakety yak.
Don't talk bad.
Just finish cleaning up your room.
Okay, so we're not off the air. We just stopped playing music right in the middle of the music. I thought for a second we were off the air, but I think you can hear my voice, so I'll let you know. It's the Talkback Hour every day, noon until 1. And on Mondays, it's reserved for your rants and or raves. 519-570-2545, star 570, and 1-800-570-5715. Right to the phones we go. Tom, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Mike. Great day, nice and sunny, so I'll have that rave about that. What I don't understand right now is that, first of all, Trump he says he's tired and we've got a bad deal from Canada. But if Canada became the 51st state, he would subsidize us, which I don't understand that part. I don't know what people are thinking here, that we can you can promise this guy anything and juggle as many balls as possible, but he cannot be trusted, and he does not deserve any benefit of the doubt here. And I really appreciate what you were talking before the election. This provincial should not be about Doug Ford. It should be about Ontario and what Ontario needs here. So if the other two political parties are actually trying to bring forward what they want to do for Ontario, they should be listened to and should be taken seriously. As for Doug Ford here, he's lost all credibility in my point of view, because as soon as the reprieve was granted, well, we're going to take this off the table, we're taking that off the table. Why didn't you just hold everything and say everything's on the table as it is right now until 30 days later? Now we haven't even reached 30 days, and now Trump is going to possibly impose more tariffs. So brings me to the point where I don't know how Doug Ford's going to build a highway under the 401. Is it going to come out under by the Don Valley Golf Course and out by the Rouge, which is environmental land out that way? So I don't understand Doug Ford at all. I don't understand a lot of this stuff. But I'm also glad that Ontarians and Canadians are really starting to come together and look what's going on out there. Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, Tom. Appreciate the rants today. Listen, I just find it so interesting, and I said this to David Drew a moment ago, that if you put a camera and or microphone near Donald Trump, he cannot help himself. He must speak into it, and he speaks what sounds to me like a whole lot of nonsense. But you probably heard Prime Minister Justin Trudeau last week in that quote-unquote hot mic moment that David Drew alluded to in our last half hour. That was actually not just a hot mic moment. It was meant to be captured by reporters. This threat of annexation is real. Forget the 25% tariffs on steel and aluminum. That's just one small part of what Donald Trump said to the gathered media yesterday.
We'll see what happens with Canada, but the people of Canada would be paying less than half of the tax. If you look at the tax, they're going to be paying less than half the tax. They don't pay very much for military, and the reason they don't pay much is they assume that we're going to protect them. That's not an assumption they can make, because why are we protecting another country? Now, I love the people of Canada. We have a great relationship. But if they became our 51st state, it would be the greatest thing they could ever do. It would be unbelievable. It would be a cherished state. And think of how beautiful that country would be without that artificial line running right through it. Somebody drew it many years ago with a ruler, just a line. You look at how beautiful that is, wow, it would be very exciting. But if you look at Canada, it would be cherished as a 51st state. They don't pay their share of military in NATO. They pay very little for military. They're not protected at all. And the reason is they think we're going to protect them. The other thing is we subsidize them to the tune of about $200 billion a year. If we stop doing that, if we stop allowing them to make cars through tariffs and other things, cars, trucks, etc., what they make, they're not viable as a country.
They're not viable as a country. They'd be a beautiful state. We are a beautiful country, you knucklehead. Joe, rant or rave, good afternoon.
Yeah, Mike, back in town now. I don't know how it is that every time I call, you seem to find where all the dead spots are, but I digress. What a long, strange trip it's been. Song by the Grateful Dead, or a line from a song by the Grateful Dead. And it's only a month old. Can it get any weirder?
Yes, it will too. I guarantee it.
So 25% tariffs now on aluminum.
And steel.
Well, I don't really care as long as you leave the auto industry alone, because that's my own little narcissistic bent on that. But how are you going to explain to Boeing, oh, your prices just went up 25%, or Lockheed Martin or General Dynamics? Like, how somebody is going to sit in front of Trump and go, are you for real? Like, seriously? They don't have the capacity to produce aluminum that we do, not even close. So, and by the way, who owns Hamilton? The Americans. That transaction happened decades ago. They've owned Hamilton Steel since, I was in high school. Like, hello? How's that going to work? Man, it just gets weirder, Mike, by the minute.
It does, Joe. Appreciate the call. And I promise you, it will continue to get weirder still. We have only just begun. Kyle, good afternoon.
I got a rave to that guy that called me a psychopath on Friday. Apparently, he doesn't like the way I like my money. I'm not the one that's eating McDonald's and supporting a CEO of McDonald's making $20 million a year, but you're going to complain about me, who's not even the 1% of Canada, making a great salary, but you're going to complain that I like money? Sorry, buddy, if you get offended over that, that's your problem, not mine. You just keep gulping down those Big Macs and complaining about me, because I really appreciate it. Thanks, Mike.
All right, Kyle. Appreciate the call. We did have a call on Friday suggesting that Kyle is a psychopath for this.
That's the whole point, because I want to make more and more money. I like money. I love money.
The point is to make more and more money. It's like being in the game of Monopoly, except it's real life. It's the Mike Farwell Show. Rant or rave, your 12 o'clock talkback hour continues. 570 News Radio and Rogers TV. Phone lines are busy this Monday afternoon. Let's get right back to them. Bob, good afternoon.
Hi, Mike.
Hi, Bob.
The thing I want to pick on right now is this post office stuff. I remember back when I was in high school, it seemed like the post office went out on strike pretty much every contract. And the public tolerated it. And over time, I thought they were starting to get the message. And obviously, with all the trouble they've had this last one, they haven't got that. I think they should just agree to settle them, give them almost what they need, but just the cliffhanger here is at the end of the next 4-year term, the post office goes to once a day delivery. That's it. In the meantime, it just whittles down to that. And if you get once a week, you can live with that. If you're some business or whatever, you need it more frequently, you pay extra for daily delivery. Just tired of this. It just goes on. Give them what they need. For lack of better words, buy them off, and then just in 4 years, the whole problem is not gone, but hopefully controllable.
Did I miss something here, Bob? Is there another postal strike that I missed, or are you just still frustrated by the most recent one?
I'm frustrated by the most recent one. I understood they've legislated them to talk, and they have to come up with an agreement. Is that not the case?
So
there's a monthly limit on this. I don't know, a few months away. They have to reach an agreement if some are arbitrated.
And you want the contract after this one, once we finally get this all sorted out, you want it to be once a week delivery from now on.
Yeah, it doesn't work. Daily postal service to homes and residences, nobody needs that. If you think you do need it, then there should be an option. They can sort your mail into some box at the post office and you get it, but you pay for that daily extra. And I just don't need this coming back anymore. It's end of the postal union just thinks they can try to hold us ransom, and I'm done with it. That's how I feel.
All right, Bob, appreciate the call. Just looking at canadapost.ca and the negotiation update on January the 29th, so about 2 weeks ago now. Canada Post and the Canadian Union of Postal Workers participated in 2 days of hearings this week at the Industrial Inquiry Commission, led by labor and arbitration expert William Kaplan. Canada Post senior leaders presented at the hearing on Monday. And here we go. Goes on and on and on. We appreciate everyone's patience and understanding as we work through this process. We'll continue to keep customers informed about negotiations with Cup W. Bob, I'm sorry you're as frustrated as you are. I guess it goes to show how little I rely on what gets delivered to my door. And in the midst of that last lengthy and ongoing postal strike, I signed up for some e-billing, which I probably should have done a long time ago, but I'm old and that's how I roll. Anyway, so I have even less need for it now because bills get delivered right into my inbox, and that's usually what I get in the mail. Junk and bills. So I haven't really missed it. I think what we always have to remember are those more remote and rural communities that are very much reliant on the post. Anyway, we'll continue ranting and or raving with Toll-Free Jay. My man, good afternoon.
Well, we now know that Any Given Sunday is not just a movie.
Listen, Any Given Sunday is bring a good defense and you'll win a championship.
Well, thank God it starts again in September.
What, you miss football already?
I do. Well, that was that's cool. I am so glad I didn't go out to watch that thing last night.
Yeah, it would have been a waste of time, Jay. You're right. It was it just wasn't a good game. I was, quite frankly, stunned at how poorly the Kansas City Chiefs played. I get that the Philadelphia Eagles played incredibly well. Their defense was terrific. But, and how could all of those teams throughout the entire regular season not figure out all you have to do to beat the Chiefs is make life difficult and or uncomfortable for Patrick Mahomes? Who knew? And the Philadelphia Eagles did that all day. They ate the Kansas City Chiefs offensive line for breakfast, lunch, and dinner during that game yesterday. Walter, rant or rave, good afternoon.
How are you, Mike? Well, listen, just to continue on about that game, did you see the stat they put up about the size of their defense or their offensive line as well?
The Eagles' offensive line?
Yeah. Like the average height is 6'6", average weight is 338.
Yeah, it was impressive. Yeah, you're right. Jalen Hurts, the Eagles quarterback, had all day to operate, and Patrick Mahomes had none.
Right. So, anyways, like about this Trump thing, like, what the heck could Canada do if Trump wanted to annex us? In a few short words, absolutely nothing. That if he wanted us, he could just come in and take it. He looks up to guys like Putin when he annexed that Crimea. He thought that was an awesome move. And if anything was going to stop us from having him, come in here, I have no idea what it is. No idea what it is. And, actually, after I say that, Mike, you know what's happening on Wednesday night? The Four Nations Cup is starting. And I'd like to hear your take on what you think about Team Canada's chances. I know everybody says, "Oh yeah, we're going to win it," but I don't know, man. Like we're a little iffy in goal. That's the only spot that I'm concerned about, and I still think that we're going to win it. But I mean, I'm a little iffy on it. What do you think, Mike?
It's funny, Walter. You want to talk a little bit about Donald Trump, a little bit about the Super Bowl, a little bit about the Four Nations Cup, but you don't want to talk about my OHL team already clinching a playoff spot and yours. What is your OHL team doing? Yeah, your OHL team's in the basement there in Guelph.
Yeah, and it's a good thing we got rid of Cam Allen when we did.
Oh boy, that's bad news, eh?
Is it ever? So, Yeah, I mean, like, I only have a few minutes, Mike. Like, you get 3 hours, so I got to try and fit it all in.
I get you. No, I get you. And I got to run because my minutes are running short here before the 12:30 news and a commercial break I'm a little bit late for. So anyway, Walter cheers for the Guelph Storm. I, of course, cheer for the Kitchener Rangers. Cam Allen, a defenseman formerly of the Guelph Storm, now of the London Knights, was arrested over the weekend and charged with driving under the influence and leaving the scene of a crash, a single-car crash. So he is in very, very, very warm water, Cam Allen of the OHL's London Knights. To Walter's question about the Four Nations Cup, look, the world has absolutely caught up to Canada when it comes to hockey, but I will absolutely be cheering for Canada. And yeah, I know everybody's asking, oh my gosh, what about goaltending? What about goaltending? Look, you give me a team with Connor McDavid on it, and I think we've got one of the best chances in the world to win. So go, Canada, go. Four Nations Cup opens on Wednesday. It's Rant or Rave on your Mike Farwell Show, 570 News Radio and Rogers TV. And because it's a talk back hour, it continues with you talking back to us. Rant or Rave. Mark, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Mike. Mike, I watched the entire game last night, and I heard you talking today that Paul McCartney was in attendance.
Yes, sir. Saw him a couple of times.
Geez, I missed that. I don't know how. I watched the entire game.
Wow,
really.
You probably fell asleep at certain parts. It was such a terrible game, Mark.
It really was a lousy game.
It was.
And Mike, what'd you think of the halftime show?
I paid zero attention to it. I could not possibly have cared less about that halftime show.
Mike, that was the worst halftime show I've seen in my entire life, okay?
Okay.
And a lousy game.
Both of those things I agree with.
You know who they should have had up on stage?
Who?
McCartney and Ringo.
There you go.
There you go, Mike.
Thanks, Mark. Appreciate it. I would have been okay with Paul McCartney getting up on stage. Look, it's just not my cup of tea. I've heard lots of people who liked it. What I find interesting is how much our sensibilities have changed in the past couple of decades, right? About 20 years ago, everybody was losing their collective minds because Janet Jackson's breast appeared on television. Last night, you get one rapper doing a diss track to another rapper. I just used the phrase diss track in a sentence, by the way, but accusing another rapper of being a pedophile. And we're okay with that today. But 20 years ago, heaven forbid we see a breast. Rant or Rave, your 12 o'clock talkback hour continues on the Mike Farwell Show, 570 News Radio and Rogers TV. On Mondays, it is your Rant or Rave edition of the 12 o'clock talkback hour. Right back to the phones we go for Steve. Good afternoon, Steve.
How you doing, man?
I'm doing all right. How are you?
Oh, not too bad. Any day above ground's a good day, right?
I could agree with that. Yes, sir.
So I might have a few pauses because I've had a couple strokes, so my speaking sometimes gets a little garbled. But what I wanted to bring up was this Donald Trump bringing up the whole 51st state. I feel like this is a huge threat, and it shouldn't be taken lightly by any Canadian. And I think maybe he needs a reminder of 1812 when we came into the White House, ate all their food, got drunk, and then burned down their house.
Yes, but perhaps a history lesson would serve Mr. Trump well.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like most Americans don't know enough about geography or where to find themselves on a map. I find it very ignorant.
All right, fair enough.
Thanks. Have a good one.
Thanks, Steve. You too. I love that little reference. And yes, it's popped into my head an awful lot, especially when, and look, Donald Trump's not wrong when he talks about us not spending a whole lot on our military. We know it's been well documented that we have not lived up to our NATO commitments of 2% of GDP. And yes, we do absolutely rely on the United States to protect us militarily. But when he was talking, and we played the clip earlier this hour about that imaginary line that somebody once drew with a ruler to separate Canada and the United States, I was thinking to myself, you just wait. But like, you remember, right? You remember how hard fought this country was for us. And the fact that, yeah, we came and burned down your place of government. You had to repaint it white to cover up all the burn marks in it. So just remember that, please, and thank you. Grant, good afternoon.
Yeah, he needs to keep his mouth shut.
You be careful now. That's the most powerful political figure in the world.
We need to have Lennox lose and him in the boxing ring.
What do you think? This is Justin Trudeau and Senator Patrick Brazo again?
And let Lennox kick.
That's not a bad idea.
Well,
you want to send can we send the Vanderpools too? And Mandy Boujol. Let's send all of our good boxers from Canada to Washington.
It doesn't make a whole lot of sense because he already said there's 30 days of these tariffs. So then keep your word. I don't know why his people can't tell him, shut your mouth. You agreed to this, then shut your mouth.
All right. Well, listen, I get it. But not a lot of people are telling Donald Trump what to do. Donald Trump is making it up as he goes along. And every opportunity he gets in front of a camera or a microphone, he takes full advantage of it. Darren, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Okay, so about the 51st state, for people who know a little bit about U.S. politics, okay, they've argued for 50 years about Washington, D.C. becoming a state. Huge implications, 2 more senators, blah, blah. Texas technically has a constitution that can divide it up into 5 separate states. Never going to happen either. Too much hassle. Bottom line is, there is no way ever Canada will ever be part of the states. If for no other reason, it's going to be 2 lefty senators that are going to swing the thing. They don't even want it. It's a negotiating thing. Everybody keeps falling. If you remember when Trump first won, Carrier Air Conditioning said, we're going to move our plant to Mexico. He said, if you move your plant to Mexico, I'm going to put a tariff on your re-entry stuff into the States to make it not worth it. And then they said, okay, we won't move our plant. And he says, okay, I won't put the tariffs on. It's all it's the 1, 2, 3s of negotiating. And the same with Canada. I said, there's no way he's going to put the 25%. But it is fair that Canada step up and do more at the border. There are 30 major drug cartels operating in Canada, including the Sinaloa cartel from Mexico. We do have a drug problem. And because drugs are so much cheaper here, even the legal ones, they're so much cheaper. There's huge pressures of drug flow from Canada into the States because there's so much money to be made. I'm actually in that space. I know about that, the legal side of it. Anyway, do not worry about the 51st state. It is never, ever going to happen. Ever, ever.
All right, Darren, appreciate the call. Don't ever say never, okay? I'm not overly concerned about the 51st state. However, the joke's gotten a little bit old. And frankly, we do have international rules and law, the conventions of which are being broken repeatedly by Donald Trump, repeatedly bringing up this idea. Let's not forget that either. Steve, good afternoon. Rant or rave?
Actually, Mike, I just have one thing to say.
Okay.
I'm on air, right? Okay.
Yeah, you're on air.
Our world problems could have been solved months ago, 2 inches to the right. That's all I can say.
Whoa.
Have a good day.
Okay.
I know it's harsh. It's harsh.
It is harsh, Steve.
Okay.
Okay.
But it's a reality. Ciao.
Ciao, if you say so. You get the reference, right? If the attempted assassin had been a better shot, our world problems would be behind us. Listen, Donald Trump is creating quite the stir. Is he responsible for all of the world's problems? Here we go with some generalizations again. However, I hear where you're coming from on that, Steve. As you point out, harsh, but you've expressed your opinion, which is what you get to do on the 12 o'clock talkback hour every day. This is Monday, which means it's rant or rave. And we continue on 570 News Radio and Rogers TV. Our daily talk back hour gives you a chance to have your say. 519-570-2545, star 570, and 1-800-570-5715. Use any of the numbers, and a pro tip for you: if you call one and you can't get through, try one of the other numbers. We've been busy today, but there's a line open for you right now to be a part of Rant or Rave, our Monday edition of the 12 o'clock Talkback Hour. Afif, good afternoon.
Hey, good afternoon, Mike. That was an awesome game. And no, not the Houston Eagle one. The Kitchener Rangers.
Kitchener Rangers, Saturday night, 9 goals. 9 to 1. Man. Yeah, I mean, I got tired calling the goals, so maybe you missed one.
I know I missed a couple, but my God, that was an insane game. I was like wow, that's a routing of the team.
And the Rangers clinched a playoff spot with that win.
Yep, which I'm happy about.
Me too.
And also, it was a good weekend because they also won the day before. So
they certainly did. They won on Friday night as well. Came from behind to win 4-3.
Yeah, now hoping that they can actually win the whole entire Memorial Cup as well.
Wouldn't that be exciting?
Yeah, for sure, bro.
All right, Afif, appreciate the phone call. Listen, I don't want to say this out loud, so please, let's just keep it between us, okay? But the Memorial Cup this year is being hosted in the Quebec League in Rimouski. And you see, I don't know how to tell you this, but you see, what I want to say is, when the Kitchener Rangers have previously won the Memorial Cup, which they've done twice, they've done it when it was hosted in Quebec. That's all I'm going to say. It's just between us, and it's a long way between now and then. But we're having some fun. The team has clinched a playoff spot. And oh, by the way, don't forget that we've got some Tuesday hockey this week. The Oshawa Generals are in town. That should be a real good hockey game tomorrow night at the Kitchener Memorial Auditorium. So come on out to the rink. Join us in the arena. Have some fun. If you can't make it there, don't worry. Paul Fixter and I have got you covered right here on 570 News Radio. We'll start our pregame show tomorrow evening at 6:30, bring you all of the action. We'll stick around for Rangers talk, take your calls, talk some hockey, and then Fixie and I go on the road again for the weekend, right through Family Day with 3 games. Kingston on Friday, Ottawa on Sunday, and Peterborough on Monday. But tomorrow night, some Tuesday night hockey in Kitchener. Our Rangers, who have clinched a playoff spot, back in action on home ice. Paul, you're on the Talkback Hour. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Zaphod Beeblebrox.
Who, what, now, where?
You don't know the name?
Say that again, please.
Zaphod Beeblebrox.
I do not know the name.
The intergalactic president of the universe. His qualifications to be the intergalactic president was that he was a most outrageous character. He was a convicted criminal. He was a drunk. He was all kinds of trouble. He was the perfect intergalactic president, just like Donald Trump. He is there to distract people away from who is actually running things in the background. That's why he was a perfect intergalactic president. Convicted criminal, the whole bit. And could I also mention that look at the clown that we've got that's distracting Canadians from who is actually running Canada.
Who, Pierre Poilievre?
I said, who is leading Canada?
No, you just said, look at the guy that we've got that's distracting people from who's leading Canada. I thought Pierre Poilievre was doing that.
Oh, no.
Oh.
It's the people in the background, the Telfords and whatnot that are running things from the background while Trudeau distracts Canadians as to what is going on, just like Trump is distracting Americans from who is running things in the background in the U.S.
Who's running things in the background in the U.S.? Elon Musk? Mark Zuckerberg?
Yeah, you fill in the blanks.
I want to come back to that name. In which work of fiction did what's-his-face?
Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Oh, my gosh, how could I forget? Hitchhiker's Guide. I'm sorry, Paul. I'm sorry. I was more of a Hardy Boys kid and a Stephen King guy back in the day.
Okay, so what's the answer to life, the universe, and
42.
Everything? Very good. You
Thank
have
you.
A great day.
Thank you, Paul. You too. See, I'm partway there with you. Speaking of hitchhiking, tell me if you think this is absolutely bananas. Okay, I know this is absolutely bananas, but I have this ridiculous fascination with the idea of trying in the modern day. Yes, in 2025. Do you think the station would give me the time off to put this social experiment to work? I want to try to hitchhike my way across the country. It's a thing that used to happen. I remember passing those hitchhikers when we were driving the highways and byways of this province when I was a kid, and we'd go cottaging and whatnot. Ain't nobody hitchhikes no more, or very few people do. But gosh darn it, I want to try. Am I completely out of my mind if I want to try hitchhiking from? I won't even go. No, I do want to go coast to coast, actually. So yeah, I'll fly out east. I'll hop on a Flair Airlines flight out to the East Coast, and then start my hitchhiking journey from there and see what happens. Could I hitchhike from one end of the country to the other? And should I hitchhike from one end of the country to the other? I know the answer to that, but I just thought I'd share since Paul brought up hitchhiking. It's your 12 o'clock talk back hour. This is the Mike Farwell Show. 570 News Radio and Rogers TV. About 4 minutes away from 1 o'clock, an update in the 570 News Center, and then Rob Snow standing by with Now You Know, taking you through until 3 this afternoon. We continue our talk back hour with Doug. Doug, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Mike. I just had a quick thought. I wonder if any of the Donald's advisors have pointed out to him that if he takes over Canada and makes us all American, that there's going to be 30-plus million more people voting Democrat in the United States. We can get rid of this guy if he takes us over.
All right, Doug, let's just play right into his hands, right? I don't know. I mean, I've heard that narrative put forward before. And yes, we would certainly lean further left. But in the current state of politics, I'll remind you that the leader in federal polls here in Canada is a right of center Pierre Poilievre. So I don't know that it would be a wash. But yes, generally, there's a reason we call the Liberal Party the natural governing party of Canada. So I hear you, Doug. I hear you. Ernie, good afternoon.
Hey, Mike. Man, either of our teams could have. Why don't the Chiefs play like that when they play our team?
No
you know what
kidding.
I mean?
Hey, come on. Like, what an embarrassment that was yesterday.
Quick points here. One of the good things that I'm happy that's actually open to the conversation now is the provincial talks that we should have had. I think we can agree years ago that this should have happened. So I see that as a benefit because of all this chaos that's happening. So that's my one positive thing that I'm trying to take with this stuff. The other thing that I rant is the Japanese Prime Minister going to the USA and, hey, we're going to get our gas off of you, when they were begging us to sell our natural gas to them, and we said no. And now they signed that deal in the USA, and the Japanese Prime Minister also said, Toyota, everybody else, we're looking forward to building. We got 2 more plants coming up in the States, and we're looking to invest in there. And I'm just like, I'm thinking about the collateral damage of a lot of these big businesses or even small businesses that are reconsidering either staying here or thinking, we're not going to go to Canada right now because it's too messy. And it's just like the sad point in the rant that I have. But that's what I got to say, Mike.
All right, Ernie, appreciate the call. I remember being pretty upset that we also wouldn't sell our liquid natural gas to Germany way back when. Here we are. And today we must live with the decisions of yesterday. And I agree with Ernie. It is kind of nice that all this that's going on between Canada and the United States, Donald Trump and our leadership here in Canada has brought out a renewed sense of patriotism and a love of country and a reminder of what it is that we have that might actually be worth fighting for. Not that it would come to physical or military fighting, but that is definitely a bright side to all of this. As we wind things down here on the program today, just looking ahead to tomorrow's show. And I already reminded you, there's hockey tomorrow night, so you get a double dose of Farwell and Fixter on the show tomorrow, or during the day tomorrow. We're going to have a game tomorrow night, and I'll be here for the usual show from 9 until 1. We're going to have Regional Police Chief Mark Crowell and Staff Sergeant Scott Griffiths, who heads up the Traffic Services Unit, on with us tomorrow between 10 and 11. They usually join us on the first Tuesday of every month between 11 and noon, but scheduling just didn't align for us this month. So they're on tomorrow, which is the second Tuesday of the month, and a little bit earlier. But if you've got a policing question you would like answered, you can have it answered directly during the show tomorrow, 10 till 11. Ask the Chief with Chief Kroll and Staff Sergeant Griffiths on the program tomorrow. Now You Know with Rob Snow is coming up until 3 this afternoon. Colin Robertson is our guy on the other side of the glass. My name is Mike Farwell. Bye for now.